Hare Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to welcome myself back to the Bhagavata. I've been happy to see everybody, and that we're restarting our Bhagavata class on Wednesday night. So we're happy to have His Holiness B.A. Ashram Swami here with us. He's a really wonderful, merciful soul who visits Tucson, one of the only elevated souls who visits here, comes here from other places. We have our own elevated souls, but Maharaj is a wonderful devotee and really inspires and enlivens us when he comes here. So he's going to speak tonight about the glories of Bhagavatam. And next week also we're having a guest speaker. His Grace Hari Leela Prabhu will be joining us. And so he'll also give a special Wednesday class. He's a teacher at the Mayapur Institute. And he's prominent in the Mayapur community as a person who gives wonderful classes. This is his first time in the United States. I invited him here as he's a very member of the Mayapur Institute, and I think he preaches in Dubai mainly. So he'll be joining us, and then the next Wednesday after that will be off because I will be preaching in Phoenix, and then we'll resume as normal. So we have some special guests, but it's still the same Bhagavad Gita, the same mercy and nectar that we're trying to get from this class. So without any further ado, Ashram Maharaj.
Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam Bhangum Lankayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatide Shatarine Mancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. I hope, forgive if we find me, I've already done it, stammering, because just only a little, I'm always nervous. I used to, because I'm really kind of a reserved person, I used to talk about how, especially at the beginning of the semester, but actually it was before every class I taught when I was teaching in college, I would close the door to my office and I'd sit down. I'd get myself centered with some breathing and, kind of reassure myself that I can do this, getting up in front of a couple dozen people and trying to move us through the process of writing or whatever it was I was teaching. And then I don't know if anybody's ever seen an LA Lakers home game, but I used to watch them in the 80s when Kareem and Magic were on the team, because I was renting a room from a friend of mine who would have the Lakers games on. And at their home games, just before the teams come out on the court, the announcer would say, "It's showtime." And I would actually say that out loud to myself before I got up and would walk to that class. And this was especially the case at the beginning of the semester because it was people I didn't know. So I'm always nervous, but this was a kind of a really interesting and sweet challenge. I think I'm always going to be miffed with and grateful to Kirtan for asking me to do this, because just the idea, the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam, it's insane. I'd have to talk for a week. So maybe we can do kind of Bhagavat Mahatmya Bindu, just a drop. That's all I think I can manage in an hour or so. So I want to start just by talking a little bit about how the Srimad Bhagavatam is unique in all the Sanskrit literature. It's part of it's classed among the Puranas, which are ancient Sanskrit texts exploring different aspects of Vedic or Hindu or Sanatana philosophy. And there are some characteristics that Srimad Bhagavatam has that distinguishes it starkly from even the other Puranas. So you've got the Vedas, which includes the Upanishads and the Samhitas, and then you have the Puranas, and there are 18 main Puranas, and then you have the Itihasas like Ramayana and Mahabharata, the kind of histories. And there are certain conventions for a Purana. Certain things, certain topics need to be addressed, and certain things are done. But among the things that distinguish the Bhagavatam from any of the other Puranas is that it's very tightly composed. It has a very solid structure. It presents a very consistently coherent argument that kind of builds throughout the Bhagavatam, which is a little different from the other Puranas, because sometimes they just kind of go here and there. And it seems like different topics are addressed in the Bhagavatam, and different ideas might even be presented. But usually quite often I see them as being presented by way of contrast. I'll take a little look at that in a few minutes. Another thing that distinguishes it from the other Puranas are its vocabulary and its grammar. The grammar in the Bhagavatam is mixed deliberately. There's classical Sanskrit. There's a lot of Vedic Sanskrit, which you just don't see in most Sanskrit literature. And there are words in the Srimad Bhagavatam that you won't find anywhere else. I heard Radhika Ramana talking about this, and he pointed out that when he was working on a translation of the Bhagavatam, he would go to the go-to Sanskrit English dictionary, Monia Williams, from the late 19th century. And he would come across a word that kind of a difficult word to translate. So he'd go to Monier Williams, and the only reference for that word in the Srimad Bhagavatam in Monier Williams would be, and usually when you have a dictionary, just like the Oxford English Dictionary, you've got this, they have really high standards for including words in their dictionary. And so there are words that have to be used consistently over kind of a broad variety of highly reputable sources. And so kind of the same with the Sanskrit English dictionary. So then we might wonder, so then he'd look up the word, and the only reference would be to the verse that he was translating. So then a question arises: how does Monier Williams know what that word means if it's not used anywhere else? And the answer is that he has to consult the Sanskrit commentaries written by different acharyas, starting with Sridhar Swami and then up to some of our more modern commentators like Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Sanatan Goswami. We see them especially, we see Jiva Goswami and Sanatan Goswami especially in the 10th canto. So it has this very difficult structure, very difficult language and grammar. And usually, I think one point he made, I haven't seen this for a long time, but one point he made was that Srimad Bhagavatam is kind of the standard for testing someone's knowledge of Sanskrit. It's like the lodestone, you actually kind of tell whether it's somebody who really knows their stuff if they can make out certain parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Along with the difficult vocabulary and grammar is the metrical structure. In most of the Puranas, we've got, the main meter is going to be the Anustup meter. Dharma kshetre, kuru kshetre, samaveta, yuyutsavaha, mamaka pandavaschaiva, kimakurvita sanjaya. So it's 30, the verse will be composed of 32 meters, 32 syllables. Yeah, I'm stammering already. And you'll have 32 syllables. You'll have 8 syllables in each quarter of the verse, each half a line. And it's it's a relatively very easy meter to write in because it's kind of loose compared to the other meters. There's only a couple of places where you have to worry about whether it's a strong or a weak syllable, long or a short syllable. And most of each of the padas of the quarter verses, there's some freedom for the emphasis. Whereas all the other meters, the rules for that meter are very strict. So in the Bhagavad Gita, we've got that verse, like the first verse of the Gita. Okay. And then might go to second chapter, text 7. So there's another meter that shows up in the Gita, and that is Trishtup. So it's got 11 or 12 syllables for each pada. And so we see that in text 7 of the second chapter. Karpanya dosho bhata svabhavo, pachami tvam dharma samutacheta. So when there's something going on there. There's a shift in weight when the Gita goes to the Trishtup, and we see a lot of Trishtup in the 11th chapter, where Krishna shows his universal form to Arjuna. And all the other Puranas are pretty much like that. It's not that the content is simple, but the Sanskrit is relatively simple. It's classical Sanskrit, no Vedic Sanskrit. And it's all Anushtub with some Trishtub where there's something interesting going on. Srimad Bhagavatam has, I don't even know how many meters. Some meters, a couple of meters that I think aren't used in other places. So I want to, and that starts with the very first verse. Where am I? Oh, I know I need to go here. I want to take just a quick look at it right now because I want to go back and look at the first three verses a little later. So the very first verse is in a meter or chanda called Shardula Vikriditam, or playful tiger. And you can hear this is a meter with some weight and some playfulness. This is the same meter that the Srinivasacharya's Shad Goswami Astakam is in. So it's Dharma Prochita Kaitavotra Paramo Nirmatsaranam Satam Vedyam Vastamamatra Vastu Shivadam Tapatrayo Mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kingva Paraidishvara Sadhyo Vidya Varudyate Trakritabi Sushushibhistakchanat. Oh no. That was the second verse. Shoot, what am I doing? This is how nervous I am. Oh, I didn't go back far enough. Because this is a feature. This first verse, well, you'll see. What I have on my iPad is a combination of Srila Prabhupada's purports and Darshani. So I had Prabhupada's purports and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary together. So it was a lot of scrolling back. So it's Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadyasya Yaton Vayarit Vischarte Shvavigaswara Tene Brahma Hridaya Kave Muyanti Yatsuraya. So it's this really long meter. And has it carries a lot of power, and that same meter shows up in the second verse. And then in the third verse, as we'll see in a few minutes, there's a completely different meter. So that, you might be reading Srimad Bhagavatam, if you know a little bit about Sanskrit poetry, then you might think, oh, okay, so it's got Anustup, Tristup, oh, and this one too. But as you go through, you see so many different meters. And I'm going to take a look at one particular meter in a little bit. And so it's not only philosophically dense, but it's also pretty much uniquely a uniquely beautiful poem. And it has so many, what do they call them, ornamentations, poetic devices or ornamentations in the poetry of Srimad Bhagavatam. More than, you just don't see anything like that in the Padma Purana or Brahma Vaivarta Purana or something like that. And as far as what the Bhagavatam is about, I mentioned that it has a very tight structure. It makes a very coherent argument. It actually addresses one thing and one thing only, and we'll get a better sense of that when we look again at those first three verses. I often share the first two paragraphs from Srila Prabhupada's preface to the Bhagavatam. But I think since I just did that the other night, and some of you were, well, maybe I'll read it again. It will take maybe 3-4 minutes. We must know the present need of human society. Gives us a sense of why Srila Prabhupada thought this was an important project for him to undertake. We must know the present need of human society. And what is that need? Human society is no longer bounded by geographical limits to particular countries or communities. Human society is broader than in the Middle Ages, and the world tendency is toward one state or one human society. Remember, he was writing this late 50s. The ideals of spiritual communism, according to Srimad Bhagavatam, are based more or less on the oneness of the entire human society, nay, of the entire energy of living beings. The need is felt by great thinkers to make this a successful ideology. Srimad Bhagavatam will fill this need in human society. It begins, therefore, with the aphorism of Vedanta philosophy, Janmadhyasya, to establish the ideal of a common cause. Another thing you see in that first, it starts with Janmadhyasya. So it's evoking the Vedanta Sutra, which begins with that Janmad. We're talking about that from whom everything else comes. That one from whom everything else comes. But at the end, it ends Satyam Param Dhimahi. And so that evokes the Gayatri mantra, which we find in the oldest of texts, the oldest of Vedic texts. So it's just a really kind of interesting verse. And then Srila Prabhupada says, it does that to establish the ideal of a common cause. Human society at the present moment is not in the darkness of oblivion. It has made rapid progress in the field of material comforts, education, economic development throughout the entire world. But, there's always a but there's a pinprick somewhere in the social body at large. And therefore there are large-scale quarrels even over less important issues. There's a need of a clue as to how humanity can become one in peace, friendship, prosperity with a common cause. Srimad Bhagavatam will fill this need, for it is a cultural presentation for the re-spiritualization of the entire human society. And I want to zip ahead. I was thinking of a couple of sentences we see in his introduction. This is just his preface. This isn't even the introduction proper. So, Srila Prabhupada felt that Srimad Bhagavatam would actually address all the needs of human society, all the things that are responsible for the anomalies that we see. And we'll see that, how that works in the second verse. So in his introduction, so this is, I always like this. The conception of God, he says, and the conception of absolute truth are not on the same level. I sometimes comment that most of the conceptions of God that we see, in any theology, Prabhupada says the conception of God indicates the controller, maybe even creator. But when we think about God as presented in the Old Testament, or as presented in the Quran, maybe even in some of the Puranas, because sometimes there's a little confusion about who's supreme. Different Puranas are written to inspire faith in people at different levels of eligibility for appreciating the teaching of the absolute truth. So the idea of the absolute truth, that one who is the fountainhead of everything, from whom everything is generated, and about whom everything exists. That's a completely different idea from the Krishna conception. The Krishna conception is, the absolute truth is the fountainhead of everything, especially of love. I think it's the Taittiriya Upanishad says, Rasovaisa, that he is rasa, and rasa is what's created when there are exchanges of love. So, I think of most of the conceptions we have of God in our culture as being kind of puny when compared to the Krishna conception. They're just really not really very interesting. He says, a conception of God indicates the controller, whereas a conception of the absolute truth indicates the summum bonum, or the ultimate source of all energies, the greatest good. So this and the one topic of Srimad Bhagavatam, as we see right from the first verse, is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and others are mentioned here and there as being quite significant in many of the stories that are told in the Bhagavatam. But in every instance, it all comes back to Krishna being the absolute truth. We see in the third chapter, Etechang Shakalapumsha Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. This phrase in that verse, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, Jiva Goswami explains that is the what's this?
Seed verse.
Pardon?
Hala Sutra?
No. That phrase, I usually can think of it. That phrase, Jiva Goswami, controls the entire text. That
seed verse. I say the seed verse.
Well, it's just a phrase. You got the 4 key verses in the second chapter, second canto. Usually I have the word at my command. But the idea is that phrase controls the entire text, like a king controls a kingdom. Everything. In order to understand anything in Srimad Bhagavatam, you have to read it through that filter. Just as Srila Prabhupada says in his introduction to Bhagavad Gita, which is something that really struck me when I started reading Bhagavad Gita as it is back in 1969. In one paragraph, he says, if we actually want, and this really struck me because I had tried several times to read Bhagavad Gita, different translations of Bhagavad Gita, and I wanted very much to understand it. It is something I'd wanted to understand since I was a teenager, but I just couldn't penetrate it. I couldn't make sense of it. Part of it, I think, is that 2/3 of the first chapter is just like a list of names that don't mean anything to somebody who didn't grow up with Mahabharata, as their bedtime stories or whatever, their weekend entertainment or something like that. They didn't mean a thing to me. And then you've got Krishna presenting what seems like perfectly reasonable, even dharmic arguments as to why he decided he's not going to participate in the war. He can't do it. And then what's the next thing that happens? Krishna slaps him down. He says, it sounds very, learned. It all sounds very highfalutin. He says, while speaking learned words, he says, you're just speaking foolishly. This is just silliness. Arjuna is proposing that he go to the forest or the mountains or something and just be a yogi rather than participating in this heavy war where he's going to have to kill friends, former allies, family members, his own guru, and his great uncle, who's like a grandfather, actually, to the leaders on both sides of this war. So I just couldn't, and I was trending pacifist very strongly after having spent 3 years in the Navy, spending a lot of my time reviewing aerial reconnaissance photography of what we were doing in Southeast Asia back in the mid and late 60s. So I was trending very strongly pacifist, and then Krishna slaps him down and he's going to exhort him to fight. And I'm just trying to figure out How's this great spiritual text? How's this any different from the Old Testament? There's a lot of begetting and smiting going on in the Old Testament, right? So when I read Srila Prabhupada's introduction, one thing he said was, if we want to understand Bhagavad Gita, we have to at least theoretically accept that Krishna is who he says he is in the Bhagavad Gita, that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I thought, okay, noted. Now when I read, I'm going to try to read through that filter. So in the same way that Paripasha Sutra, that's it, Paripasha Sutra, that one phrase, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So all these different avatars, this is the third chapter, which discusses many of the Leela avatars especially. And says all these avatars, they're either portions or portions of portions of the absolute truth. But through Krishna's too, but Bhagavan Swayam, but Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. He himself is the absolute truth. So that's the one point that's made throughout Srimad Bhagavatam from the beginning to the end. So let's take a quick look at this first verse. Janmadhyasya yaton vayaditaras charteshva bhivyasvarat tene brahma hridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsuraya tejavadi mridam yata vinimayo yatra trisargo mrsha dhamna svena sadani rasta kuhakam satyam param dhimi. And Srila Prabhupada's translation goes like this. Oh, my Lord Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. So a text, these sacred texts have kind of like a three-part invocation, you might say. And so the first part is offering obeisances to the deity of the text. And this is actually a convention even in Western poetry. For epic poetry, it starts with some obeisance to the poet's muse. And I remember when I went back to college, because I was an English major, I had to take a course on Milton, and we ended up reading everything Milton wrote, including Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. And Paradise Lost starts out by invoking God. He is the muse. He is the deity of that text. So it's kind of a convention of epic poetry. Of course, then they also have another convention is you got to have all the armies, and then you got to have the weapons and all that kind of stuff. You see that at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes of creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations and independent, because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations seen in of water seen in fire, or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature, appear factual, although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Now, Srila Prabhupada has a very long purport that presents 4 readings, 4 ways to read that verse. So unpacking that verse would be, I think, impossible without proper guidance. And so Srila Prabhupada presents 4 different readings. His commentary on this verse Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, whose commentaries on Srimad Bhagavatam Srila Prabhupada used extensively. He wrote 5 different readings. So there are different layers, at least, so many of these verses have at least 2 layers of meaning. We'll take a look at one of those in a little bit when we also take a look at this other meter that I mentioned. So here I am trying to kind of find my way through this commentary again to get to the second verse. I'm pretty good at navigating analog texts, paper books, electronic books, not so much. So, and then in the second verse, so the first part of this invocation is this obeisance to the deity of the text. The second part is called Vastu Nirdesha. So the first part is called Namaskar. Second part is called Vastu Nirdesha. It's a statement of the point this text is going to make, kind of like a thesis statement in your 5-paragraph essay or something like that. So it says, Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu shivadam tapatrayon mulanam. Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite, Mahamuni is made by Mahamuni Vyasadeva, Kingba Parayadishwaraha, Sadhyo Hridya Varutite Trakatrabi Sushrushi Vistakshanat. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami explains in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that by that we mean by kaitava dharma, by cheating religion. What do we mean? We mean dharma, artha, kama, moksha vancha. The aspiration for personal virtue and the kind of progress we can make in the material world by being virtuous, and the pleasure, kama, the pleasure we enjoy by our material progress. And then when we've seen through the whole thing as just nonsense, big scam, then moksha. And why cheating religion? Because it's about me. It's about my virtue, my material progress, my enjoyment, and ultimately my freedom. But Srimad Bhagavatam is, it goes someplace else. So completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure at heart. Anyway, I have a whole thing about that. Nirmatsaranam, they're satam nirmatsaranam. They're pure in heart because there's no envy there. And there's no envy there because there's no personal agenda. They're just all about Krishna. That one common cause that Srila Prabhupada mentions in his preface. And so that means that they're not even interested in dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. They're only interested in bhakti. And we get something out of that, as we'll see in the next verse. This Bhagavat, completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, which are selfishly motivated. This Bhagavat Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, we read about that in the 4th, 5th, 6th chapters of the first canto, is sufficient in itself for God realization. Bold statement. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord becomes established within the heart. And then the third one, kind of a cool verse. The third part is the Palastuti. It tells you what the fruit is of reading or hearing this text. What you get from hearing. So that's the third part of the, how do you say invoking auspiciousness? Mangalacharanam, yeah. So the third verse says, Nigama, this is a completely different, now we've got a completely different meter. Nigama kalpataror galitam palam sukhamukadam amrita dravam sangyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavika. He says, O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Shukadev Goswami. Therefore, this fruit, just think of the layers of meaning just in this verse. Because, this is kind of figurative language here, but there's real stuff going on. I'll get to that in a minute. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. Now, Shukadev Goswami was one of those liberated souls when he was born. He was born an Atmarama, a completely liberated soul. And we know that he refused to come out of the womb for a very long time. We don't understand how that long a time is possible, but it's 16 years. Poor mom. And he, because he was an Atmarama, because he was a self-realized soul, he didn't want to come in contact with the material energy and therefore fall down. So as soon as he was coaxed out of the womb by Krishna, who assured him, it'll be okay. Don't worry, you're safe. You'll be all right. But as soon as he came out of the womb, he hit the road. He took off and went into the forest to sit down and meditate on the glories of the Paramatma. And Vyasadeva was distressed. We see in the Bhagavatam that he's calling out as Shukadev is just, he didn't even bother to get clothes. He just took off. And so we see in the Bhagavatam that Vyasadeva is so distressed, he's calling out, oh my son, oh my son. And the only response he gets is echo. So he comes up with an idea how to find out where Shukadev is, because he realizes he's a self-realized, he's an Atmarama, he's a self-realized soul. He understands that, but he wants to instruct him. He feels the duty to instruct him. So he sent, I don't remember which Purana this is told in, but he sends out a couple of disciples into the forest, disguised as woodcutters and foresters, and he gives them a couple of particular verses that they should sing when they go out into the forest. And one is from the third canto. I can't remember it right now. Maybe Kirtaneshwar knows this one. But this is where Uddhava goes to Vrindavan, and after ever hearing this, he says, who could you possibly ever take shelter of other than Krishna? He's reflecting that Putana approached him with ill intent. She approached him just to kill him, but because she was wearing her Halloween costume, she was dressed up as a Brijvasi nursemaid. Krishna accepted that, and he granted her the post of a nursemaid just outside Vrindavan, not in Vrindavan, because she's not near Matsaranam. But because she was dressed like a devotee, Krishna gave her this kind of weak Vatsalya rasa. She's a kind of a nursemaid just outside the environs of Braja proper in Goloka. And there are other places where this verse comes up, including when Gadadhar Pandit is first introduced to Pundarik Vidyanidhi. And he's thinking, oh, this guy's dressed all fancy. He's wearing his Italian suit, and his $1 million Rolex solid platinum watch, and smoking a hookah, and he's got the bowl of grapes there and everything like that, sitting on a big soft mattress. And so he's thinking, this guy's a devotee? What? And so his friend Mukunda understands what's going on. So he calls out one of these verses, that one, Ahobhagyam. So, and Pundarik Vidyanidhi goes into trance, falls off his seat, and Gadadhar Pandit says, oh, oops. I was thinking, this guy is some kind of like materialist, but he's really a wonderful devotee. So he ends up submitting to Pundarik Vidyanidhi. So these, so this is even for the liberated souls, like Shukadev Goswami. He was on Atmarama, and when he heard that verse, it got his attention, broke his trance, and he decided, okay, there must be more to know. There must be more to experience than what I'm just peacefully meditating on. And so he goes back and receives instruction from Srila Vyasadeva, and that ultimately grows into the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, there's another feature of the Bhagavatam, and that is its content, that is its intent. And there's only one thing being taught here. And we see this in the 5th chapter. We see this in like 4th, 5th chapter of the 1st canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is where Narada Muni comes to see his disciple Vyasadeva. And he sees that Vyasadeva is just depressed, just bummed all the way out, just sitting there thinking, God. And what he's thinking is, I've done all this work. I've compiled the 4 Vedas and all the 18 Puranas and all the other Puranas, and then presented the Ramayana, Valmiki's Ramayana, and brought the Mahabharata together, this 100,000 verse epic poem. And that was all for the upliftment, all for the benefit of human society, but I'm still feeling unfulfilled, feeling like I've missed something. Maybe I didn't really sufficiently glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I don't know. And it's a fact, because if you study the Puranas, if you study the Upanishads and you study the Puranas, you get all kinds of different ideas about what it means, what the ultimate goal of life is, because there's something in the Vedas for everyone. One of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers called it a jungle of sounds, the Vedas, a jungle of sounds. It's just like a tangle of ideas. And as I mentioned before, like the different Puranas, some are meant to strengthen the faith and help elevate different people with different kinds of qualities and qualifications. So broadly, there are some for those in the mode of ignorance, some for those in the mode of passion, and 6 for those in the mode of goodness. But then Srimad Bhagavatam, it itself says it's Amalam Puranam, the spotless Purana. There isn't any tinge of anything material presented here in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Vyasadeva is sitting there, just completely depressed, and Narada Muni encounters him. He says, "Oh, my dear son, what seems to be the problem?" And so Vyasadeva shares a little bit of his heart with Narada Muni, and Narada Muni says, "You're exactly right. What's missing is sufficient glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his devotees, and the service that they render to him." Everything, and he compares everything else. Does anybody know what? What does he compare all other literatures to? And he's not just talking about dime novels or harlequin romances.
Places of pilgrimage for the crows.
The places of pilgrimage for the crows, and this includes all the stuff that Vyasadeva has just worked so hard putting together. He and Ganesh, right? So, what are you going to do? And so Narada Muni makes this case in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto. He just makes it really clear. Even if you do all the duties that have been performed perfectly, that have been presented in all the Vedas, if you perform those things perfectly, you still don't really gain anything. Because whatever you gain is, first of all, it's only partial, and then it's temporary. When your credit runs out, then, as Krishna says in the Gita, Kshine punyam martyalokam vishanti, you have to come back down again to the material world. So he compares it to a place of pilgrimage for the crows, and he characterizes all that work with one very strong word, jugupsitam, which means detestable, disgusting. So Narada Muni, he's actually being guru. He's not just he's not just here to be buddies with him. He's here to actually straighten Srila Vyasadeva out and get him to actually write this beautiful Bhagavatam that he taught to Shukadeva Goswami. And for everyone else's benefit, when King Parikshit was cursed, we know that he had that incident when he was in the forest hunting, and he went to Shamik Rishi's ashram, and he was the emperor after all. He expected something of a reception, at least a place to sit and some water, and he was completely ignored because the rishi was completely immersed in trance, and he had no awareness of his external senses or anything, certainly nothing beyond that. And so he ignored him, and King Parikshit uncharacteristically snapped because he was just really tired, hungry, and thirsty, and he just needed a little refuge and refreshment. And so he garlanded the rishi with a dead snake, and the rishi's son, Sringi, came along and cursed the king to die in 7 days by the bite of this interesting creature, snake bird, whatever it is. Huh? A little dragon, yeah, there we go. This is the season of dragons, still, I guess. So then Shukadeva Goswami, feeling King Parikshit's necessity, he's cursed. He goes home and just kind of checks out, just turns everything over to his son and leaves without any ceremony or anything. He goes and sits down on the river, waiting to die, contemplating one big question. What's the duty of someone who's about to die? In other words, what's the most significant, the most impactful, the most important thing we could do? And so this is the question that he gives to Shukadeva Goswami. And then later, Sutta Goswami. And this is another feature we see of this, what beautiful poetry this is. We have different narratives nested inside other narratives, like those Matrushka, the Russian nested Russian dolls. Sometimes I think 5 layers deep. So on one layer, you've got Sutta Goswami telling the sages at Naimisharanya about Shukadeva Goswami, telling about how Maitreya Rishi, Maitreya Rishi met Uddhava, and then Vidura met Maitreya, and so you have all these. Sometimes it's like 4 or 5 layers deep of narratives nested within each other. And it's just, all of a sudden, once you come out of one layer and realize, okay, now, so now Sutta is speaking again. Oh, cool. So we're all the way back up to the first layer. So that's another kind of really unique feature of Srimad Bhagavatam. I was talking about different meters and different layers of meaning as well. And there's one chapter that has this really far out meter. It's got these really interesting features that are pointed out by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And this is the 31st chapter of the 10th canto, the Gopi Gita. And so this is written in a chanda or meter. Oh, come on, I had it. Too far. The meter is called Rajahangsa, or regal swan. So it's this really kind of graceful and moving. You can even hear motion in the in the meter, in the music of the text itself. So I was going to start with the first one because there's another feature in this particular chapter that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out, and that is that in most of the half lines, most of the padas or quarters, it's not 100% consistent, but in most of them, the first syllable, the first syllable and the seventh syllable begin with the same sound. And so we'll see that in this first text. So the context here is this is in the middle, this is for their 31st chapter, smack in the middle of the rasa dance. And this is after Krishna's been dancing. First of all, he asks them, what the heck are you doing out here in the middle of the night? Like this. And then they engage in some rasa dancing. And then Krishna dumps all the gopis. He goes off with one special gopi. And they're all kind of like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Oh, she must be really, really special. And then they follow the footsteps and ultimately find her alone. Krishna's even left her, and we assume that's Radharani. Shukadev Goswami dared not mention Radha's name. The acharyas explain this. She's alluded to in one of the verses in the last chapter on the rasa dance. But he's afraid, because the clock's ticking for King Parikshit. Shukadev Goswami is feeling that pressure of time, so he's afraid that if he were to actually utter Radha's name, he would faint. He would go into trance and faint, and that would lose time for King Parikshit, and he had a duty to help King Parikshit. So this meter is called Rajahamsa, kind of regal swan. Jayati te dhikam janmana Shayata indira shashvaratrahi Dayata drishyatam dikshutavakas Dvaitratasavas tvam vichimpate. So you say in each of these quarters, Jayati te tikam janmana vraja, first and seventh syllables. Shayata indira shashvaratrahi Dayata drishyatam dikshutavakas Dvaitratasavas tvam vichimpate. That's not 100% consistent. There are some that just couldn't be worked that way. But then there's one verse that I really like sometimes to share an alternate reading of. So I mentioned that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur suggested 5 different ways to read that first verse of the Bhagavatam. And there's one verse, it's a famous verse. Some of you probably know it. This is the 9th verse. And so the gopis, I'm sorry, I was talking about the context. I got myself lost here again. So then Radha and all the other gopis, they all go sit down by the river, and they sing these 19 verses. And they're at the same time a glorification of Krishna and sometimes quite bitterly criticizing Krishna. In the very second verse, they accuse him of murder. And so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives 2 different readings for this verse. Tavakatamritam tapta jivanam kavirbiriditam kalmashapaham shravanamangalam srimaratatam uvigrananti buddhidhajana. So the translation is, the nectar of your words and the description of your activities are the life and soul of those suffering in this material world. These narrations, transmitted by learned sages, eradicate one's sinful reactions and bestow good fortune upon whoever hears them. These narrations are broadcast all over the world and are filled with spiritual power. Certainly, those who spread the message of Godhead are most munificent. Now, if you have access to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentaries on the Bhagavatam, often, and same thing with Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, especially the Bhagavatam, often it looks like he's just saying the verse again for a big part of that particular commentary. But what he's doing is he's restating it in simpler Sanskrit prose so that people can actually understand what's being said there. So for this verse, he suggests an alternative reading. So at first, it's kind of this plain reading, and it's set up as a sort of a dialogue between Krishna and the gopis. So they end up by saying, the nectar of your topics destroys the effects of all sin up to product of karmas, just how it actually hearing about Krishna destroys the reactions to our past sinful and pious activities at all different levels, whereas other spiritual practices won't destroy the karma that's already being manifest. So they talk about that, and then he suggests another meaning. If you show yourself, then your words are sweet. It's only if you show yourself, your words are sweet. You see, in the Gopi Gita, there are a few verses where the tone is a little sassy. Second verse, they accuse him of murder. Another verse, they say, you know very well why because he'd asked them, what are you all doing out here in the middle of the night in the forest? Scary, and you should be home with your families. And so you know very well why we've come here, enchanted as we are by the loud song of your flute. Now, who but a cheater like you? So very sassy language. So this alternate reading of this verse, which is exactly the opposite. They're criticizing and glorifying Krishna with the same words. The nectar of your topics destroys the effects of all sin. Oh, I'm sorry. Another meaning is, if you show yourself, then your words become sweet. Otherwise, your words have no meaning. Your words, discussion of your name, form, and pastime, become a cause of death. And here they're playing on kata amritam. So instead of kata amritam, it's kata mritam. Kata that brings about death, discussion that brings about death. And so he asks, how? Their response, by those descriptions, life becomes full of pain in separation. Tapta jivanam, another meaning of jivana is water. By those descriptions, we become like water sprinkled in hot oil. What happens? It immediately evaporates, it's gone right away. And then he said, well, if that is so, why then are these descriptions praised in the scriptures? Gotcha, right? It's a gotcha question. They have a response. Poets alone praise you and no one else. Kavi Pradititam. They describe you by habit and nothing else. By hearing about you, one develops pain in separation. By experiencing this pain, that burns up our previous sins. That suffering, that destroys our previous sins. Though by hearing about you, the Vedic rites become indestructible. When intelligent persons see that hearing about you brings suffering, they will no longer hear. Once they understand, oh, just by hearing about Krishna, I'm going to be, my heart is going to be broken open, but broken, and I can't do that. So they just won't go. And then he says, blind men mad after wealth, hoping that everyone will die from that pain, spend money to establish speakers of the Puranas in various places to spread topics about you. Therefore, that person, now, and remember the plain reading, people who spread this kind of discussion, they're the greatest benefactors, right? They're the most munificent. He says, therefore, that person on earth who sings your glories destroys many people. Thus, by spreading the poison of these topics through recitation while sitting peacefully, they are actually greater killers than murderers. Thus, intelligent persons avoid these reciters. So this is a way of plundering. Now, I want to take us from there back to the third verse of the Bhagavatam, which is that Palastuti. We read that. So he talks about the Bhagavatam as being the mature fruit of the desire tree of the Vedic literature, and it has to be passed down very carefully. You can't just shake that. You don't want to just got ripe mangoes up there. You don't want to just shake the tree, because as soon as they hit the ground, they're going to be split open, and the fruit flies are going to find it immediately. Believe me, I live under a mango tree. And so it has to be passed down very carefully. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that this fruit has some special features. It doesn't have a pit, and it doesn't have a skin, and it doesn't have strings, it doesn't have fiber. It's just juice. And so this verse is telling us, drink that juice until alayam, until liberation, or until devastation, until you pass out. Drink, belly up, drink until you pass out, and when you come to, belly up again and drink some more. This is, what he's saying is, this is the most intoxicating. We just saw these really intimate sentiments that the gopis are sharing. And they're off singing. They're sitting by the bank of the river singing this. And most pictures depicting this, you'll see Krishna. He's either up in the tree or hiding behind the tree, listening, digging. The gopis' praise and criticism of him. He loves that sassiness. So this is the fruit of actually hearing Bhagavatam, and you don't hear that with any of the other Puranas. It's just, it's just not there. You don't have that kind of get that kind of benefit, and you become completely intoxicated with the wonder, or as one of my friends used to say, one of my buddies in the Navy who was a jazz musician, the wonderfulness. You talk about the wonderfulness of yourself, the wonder of the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. You become completely intoxicated by that. So that's just a kind of a very quick look, not even with the microscope, at just a drop of the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's already bedtime.
Mirage, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful nectarian. And I'm experiencing Satam Prasangam, living something over, experiencing that.
This Srimad Bhagavatam, this is life. And because, I have a graduate degree in English, and I was an English professor for 20 odd years, I've read a lot of stuff, but I've never read anything at all like Srimad Bhagavatam. And I've read some pretty far out stuff. I read Proust. I had to take a graduate seminar to actually make room in my life for it, but I've even read that. I've read Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, most of Shakespeare's stuff. And that's all pretty good stuff. Dante, pretty good. But there's nothing like Srimad Bhagavatam. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I first met the devotees, it was at a Jimi Hendrix concert. I've probably told this too many times. But that hooked me on the Maha Mantra. And even though I was very averse to ever joining anything again after having joined the Navy, I was drawn to the devotees chanting. So I used to chant on the other side of the street until one night there was a devotee standing right next to me, waiting for me to stop chanting so that he could get my attention. And he invited me to their feast the next day. And the next day I decided, okay, I am going to go completely, this is the late 60s, so you might understand what I'm alluding to here, completely clear-headed, and I'm just going to open my heart and see what Hare Krishna does. I usually accompany this with a caution. Kids, don't try this at home. It's a very dangerous way to approach a kirtan. And then this one devotee, Turidas, at that feast, he talked me into coming to this feast. I told him I would, and then I woke up in the morning, I thought, well, I told a monk I was going to do something. I probably ought to do it. So I went, and I just threw myself into the kirtan. And then Turidas showed me Bhagavad Gita as it is, which just kind of opened up to me. And so when I read Srila Prabhupada's introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, I thought, okay, I've got a key for understanding the Bhagavad Gita. Maybe I'll get somewhere in it. And I was really becoming overtaken by the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga. And when I started reading Srimad Bhagavatam, especially when I read that second verse, and in the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about this non-enviousness, this purity of heart that comes from not having a personal agenda. He says, so he's talking about how all the struggle that we have, all the friction that we have in the world is people competing for different kinds of resources, attention, money, power, whatever, girls, boys, serf. He makes that point. Oh, where was I going? So we're always competing for all these different kinds of resources. He says, but the transcendental devotees of the Lord not only don't compete for these resources, but instead they strive to create a competition-less society with God at the center. And when I read that sentence, somebody was asking me yesterday if I'd had, Sean was asking me, I think, if I'd had any epiphanies. What was my first epiphany? And it kind of unfolded, and it was like it completely popped when I read that verse. And I thought, this late 60s, this is the revolution we've been looking for right here. Sign me up. And that's when I realized I want to be a devotee of Krishna. I want to be a follower of Lord Chaitanya. So this book isn't information. We get in the fifth canto, you've got a description of the universe. That's a description of the universe. It's not necessarily a physical description that would correspond with what we can verify with our senses. It's poetic, and it's a vision of the universe that brings us, as always in the Bhagavatam, straight to bhakti, to Krishna's lotus feet. And you got the hells. Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Bhagavata essay referred to those hells you see in the fifth canto as imaginary. So apparently they're taking place on some plane of consciousness different from what we're used to. There isn't anything like it. It's not just meant to give us information. This doesn't teach a religion in any conventional sense. There isn't, there's God in there in so many different forms, but it all leads to the absolute truth, Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The most, especially during the month of Kartik, during Damodar Ashtakam season, the most adorable personality that you could possibly imagine. That's the absolute truth. That's the focus, the center of everything. He's like a black hole. Krishna, right, means black. It's like a black hole. And if you get too close to it, and this is why I was standing on the other side of the street back in 1969. If you get too close, you fall into its gravitational pull, and eventually you merge with that black hole. We don't know what happens then. But he's like this black Krishna. Krishna, he draws everything to him like a black hole. And Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of that adorable boy who is absolutely irresistible to everyone. And so it's not just meant for information, it's meant for transformation, as the Bhagavatam itself, for a revolution in the hearts of those who are caught up in an impious society. Create that kind of revolution. And I hadn't even gotten to that verse yet. I was still just on in the purport of the second verse, and I thought, oh, okay, this is what I've been looking for. So yeah, there isn't anything like Srimad Bhagavatam. There's I don't want to do that. It's too late. Any other comments or? Tamal Hari?
Thank you so much.
That's just fun to say. I'm getting used to it.
Hopefully I can put this together quickly. Coming from an English teacher's perspective for those decades where you've even taught, people how to write creatively and developing plot and character. Were there any particular stories that you look at now in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and every one of them is marvelous, certainly, but that you look at and say, that's the perfect story with like the perfect characters and plot? I don't know if that's making sense. Like Prahlad Maharaj's story, for example, it's full of surprises and reversals. And
Yeah. Prahlad's story is a really amazing as well, because it's all about. He even approached the Lord with a material motive, but because the practice that Narada Muni gave him, including chanting the holy name and meditating on this form, this beatific form of the Lord that Narada described in such detail, that Dhruva was, he was able to choke up the movement of airs in the universe and get the Lord to come see him personally. He's sitting meditating on this form of the Lord, and all of a sudden it disappears. The trance breaks. He wakes up a little perturbed for a moment until he sees that same form right in front of him. And then he doesn't want, because he's attained perfection. There's the Lord's lotus feet right there. So I like Prahlad's story is amazing. There's a special characteristic about that Leela in the Bhagavatam. In the other Puranas, Lord Nrsingadev is the protagonist. He's the hero. He saves Prahlad. But in the Bhagavatam, first of all, outside the 9th canto, this is the longest Leela, 10 chapters for the Nrsinga Leela, starting with the first chapter of the 7th canto. But in the Bhagavatam, Prahlad is the protagonist. Prahlad's the hero. The devotee is the hero. And Lord Nrsingadev is a supporting character. He comes to kind of like clean everything up. And then, after Prahlad glorifies him, glorify Prahlad. The story, Gajendra's story, is very instructive, very deep. And then anything in the 10th canto. I like the Brahma. I happen to particularly like the Brahma Vimohana Leela. Aghasura Leela. The beginning of the 12th chapter on the Aghasura Leela. I think Shukadev spends 10 verses describing what Krishna and his friends are doing in the forest during the day. And they're just parting around like country boys, They're cowherds. They're running around in the forest playing games, making fun of the animals. Shukadev's mind. He says, this is the absolute truth, the Brahman for those who are seeking that kind of liberation. And these kids are just playing with them. What kind of good fortune, what kind of pious activities could bring them to this? It's like he's saying there aren't any. Only devotional service could bring them to this, where they're just messing around with the absolute truth as if he were their buddy. So that's a kind of, and then Aghasura shows up and the cowherd boys they're kind of like thinking back and forth, caves, whatever. If it turns out to be a snake, Krishna's got our back. And they just kind of like march in. Okay, let's go see if we can, stand it in there, let's go see what this is all about. And Krishna comes to save the day in the most wonderful way. That's a good question. That's a really fun question. Do you have any favorite stories?
I was going to say that. Yeah, I always think the story of Chitraketu Maharaj, such an amazing arc of a story, or Bharat Maharaj too.
Oh gosh, Bharat Maharaj, yeah. Yeah, there's a real story arc there. Oh, even Narada Muni has a backstory, right? Of the story, in I think the six and seven chapters, I guess, of the first canto, that he was the son of a maidservant, but the way she made her living was to take care of sages who were traveling, and then particularly during the rainy season, because they would settle down for 4 months, he would get the opportunity to hear from these great sages, Srila Prabhupada refers to as Bhaktivedantas, and to take the remnants of their meals. And then when his wife was killed by a snake bite, he didn't bat an eye, he just split. And he just traveled all over the world, and he got a quick spurt, he got a quick vision of the Lord as a kind of a trailer, sort of a tease. Here I am, peekaboo, playing peekaboo, and okay, now I'm gone. And this is just to increase your hankering for me. But even before that, he was a Gandharva, like a rock star, in the heavenly planets, getting all the girls, beautiful, great singer. But because he used his talents for material ends, he got cursed to become a Shudra. So that's that. And then Narada Muni becomes the guru of pretty much everybody, right? I think he showed up in every canto of Srimad Bhagavatam.
You can always sometimes say that the whole Bhagavatam is a glorification of his guru. Vyasa is glorifying his guru.
Yeah, I think
and
so.
His God brothers. It's like the whole thing is glorifying his guru and God brothers.
Yeah. See Chaitanya Charitamrita, what's going on in Chaitanya Charitamrita? Loving association among devotees. Pretty much not much else. Yeah. Okay, I think it's more than late enough.
Maharaj, thank you so much. That was a perfect reintroduction to our Bhagavatam Sangha after our hiatus.